Before I start this video, I'm going to show you my current win rate so you at least know that I got some credibility to talk on this issue. Win rate is currently 1 in 4 games and top 5 rate is over 50%. Welcome back to the channel, it's me RageMaster with the tactical and strategic layer of Contractors Showdown's Battle Royale mode, fully explained in this guide/tutorial. It's useful to break down the game into 3 distinct disciplines. First is skills. We're not going to be covering those. Those you're going to learn intuitively as you play the game. And there's going to be some other videos maybe in the future from me, but there's certainly some online which explain exactly how to control, move your character and show your individual capabilities. But we're going to be talking about tactics which feed into the overall strategy of winning a Contractors Showdown Battle Royale game. And we are starting right at the top with this tutorial. It's an in-depth strategic deep dive 30,000 foot view, how to see everything unfold favourably and how to plan and execute strategy for victory in all of the Battle Royale game modes, solos, trios and reborn mode. This guide assumes you roughly know what you're doing in terms of character control and that you have a base level of techniques, skills and basic tactics. We'll do guides on those later, but this guide will show you how to pull it all together in real-time play to form a flexible, cohesive, comprehensive protocol to winning games in all game modes, solo, trio and reborn. Winning games. Worth repeating because the point of this guide is to bend all other considerations towards that single objective without deviation for anything else. Everything you do following this guide will be to bring you closer to winning games. You will sacrifice opportunities for XP chips, contract progression, eliminations, and even pursuit of your favourite weapon if it is not conducive with the ultimate objective of winning. Did I mention winning? So let's get started. In every game, you're going to go through 3 main phases. The first phase is the looting stage, second phase is transit, and the third phase is acquiring and securing the endgame winning position. So you need to get it in your head that you're going to pass through every single one of these 3 phases in a successful game every time you win. So you've got to get good at every one. We're going to explain each one in depth and you're going to need to act accordingly. The 3 phases are all significantly different, so let's discuss. The early game, you want to be looting, not fighting. That is your priority. This is true even in a reborn mode with respawns. The more time you can survive looting uninterrupted, the higher the likelihood you will get the edge in any necessary encounter. And we're going to talk more about necessary encounters later because those feed in incredibly to survival strategy on all game modes. You should be consistently passing the early game stage. If you're failing to do this, there's something fundamentally wrong about your early game approach. You're introducing an unnecessary wipe risk somewhere in your routine, and it's probably one of these 2 things. The first critical failure state in the early game is that you decided to land in a populated area and you're now competing with other players for the loot. So let's go into detail with the first one right here, the bad infiltration. You screwed up with your drop location of choice, and now you're in this mess where you're having to fight with hardly any loot just to stay alive. You're either dying and losing loot, or fighting and not looting. Everyone else not in that mess is gaining power while you are breaking even and risking the wipe in round 1 or 2. This is poor strategy. If you're in this position, guess what? You already fucked up. One of the easiest ways to cure this problem is to intentionally loot outside of the game zone in the storm, which is by far the best strategy to survive and gear up in the early game. It is in fact entirely possible to spend the entire early game outside of the game zone and emerge into the game zone with fully upgraded weapons and armor into the mid-game. I've done it myself on various videos on this channel. I'll link them down below. So now let's do the second regular point of failure, which is when you engage, because you haven't understood that survival is not about eliminations. You can't fight and effectively loot at the same time. Even if you win a fight, it's not really worth that much in the early game. You can get the same or better loot without risk just by looting the environment. More important than that to consider is that gunshots attract other players and teams. Should you attract such attention, teams will come in on the edge of your fight undetected and with full knowledge of your position. This is known as the third-party advantage. Through the early game looting and beyond, you should always consider the squads you have yet to locate when deciding whether to engage a squad. The squad you spotted and engaged is probably not the squad that's going to eliminate you. In both of these scenarios of bad infiltration and bad engagement discipline, you lose the ability to control if, when and how you engage, and you're at the mercy of any squad player who can control those variables. So, to recap early game, you can almost guarantee to pass early game if you A. choose a suitable peaceful loot location, and B. maintain good engagement discipline. Bottom line, it's almost never recommended to engage early game. If you waste time doing anything other than looting, even if you survive, the other players using my strategy I have outlined will overtake you in terms of items and armor going into mid-game. You want to be that guy or that team going into mid-game, overtaking in loot with a battle-ready config. Lastly, worth pointing out is that mastering early game is probably the most important phase to master. To even practice mid-game or end-game, you have to survive this first phase. If early game doesn't feel easy to you, you need to tighten it up big time, because win or lose, you will tread this path with every attempt. Get good. So let's talk about drop zone. Where you drop should be carefully considered. Open the map in the plane. Pick a location that you know won't get traffic. I advise it should be A. high distance from the plane flight path, B. outside the zone, and C. high loot concentration. Both A and B will dissuade company, and C is a fixed requirement. Many loots, no aggro. You should always feel safe enough to loot without fear. You should be comfortable enough to enter a loot mode where your only two considerations are looting efficiently and identifying potential threats. You shouldn't really need to apply any sort of sweatiness to beat early game. Very few encounters in early game should constitute necessary engagements. You should consider that any defensive action will draw in other players. You should be prepared to withdraw and displace from potential fights, even if the initial odds look good. Falling back and redirecting movement preserves your survival, puts you into fresh, unlooted areas and forces your opponents to follow you into areas that you have already looted first, making their approach predictable. You should be using detect grenades to pinpoint locations and rad grenades to prevent pursuit. You can attempt to break contact. If you're successful, squads in pursuit will waste time searching for players they can't eliminate and wasting their valuable looting time. Falling back and detecting the enemy with grenades or Mika drone is normally enough to end any pursuit, as the opponent loses all advantage. Get in, get your fucking loot, and prepare to get the fuck out. Everything more than that introduces significant unnecessary risk to early game, so play it cool. Let them be. Fight them later. Don't think you're missing out. If they're any good, you'll see them in the end game anyway. Moving on to mid-game, the purpose of mid-game is quick and safe travel. The destination is the projected end-game position as indicated by the interior circle on the map. Get your map out after every round, dial into the end zone, and be the first to arrive. Much like the early game, it's advantageous to avoid conflict and detection. If the objective is survival, which it is, you preferably want every other team to eliminate every other team. To engineer this outcome is to enact the perfect implementation of this strategy. You might have heard me previously state this in other videos, but it is possible to win with 0 eliminations. So, once again, in the mid-game, your priority is to establish early positional advantage, i.e. first to the end zone. Use the zips, use the mountain, gain height to use parachute travel, take the paths less travelled by, block lines of sight, avoid areas with gunshots, take high ground positions to perform observations, note the position and directions of travelling squads, make effort to identify enemy squad positions before they identify yours. keep a low profile. Use ridge lines to obscure line of sight. Move together as a squad to reduce your overall visual profile. Keep moving, don't get hung up on things you don't need to get hung up on. If you can charter a safe path to shops for insurance and upgrades, do so, but never, ever lose sight of the prime objective, reaching that end zone. With all that said, here's why you died in mid-game. Number 1, you transitioned to mid-game too late. Because of that, now the storm's closing right in up your ass. You still have 2 kilometers to run. You have little to no control of your path to the end zone. You can't stealth or conceal your movements. And you're getting pushed into other players in a highly predictable manner. You're not able to control if or how you engage. That extra loot you got probably isn't even going to save your ass because you lost every other advantage. Know when to say enough loot is enough. Make the call. Take the early mover's advantage. The second reason why you probably died in the mid-game is because your path to the end zone was not scouted. Something about the path you chose caused your death. Quite often, it's because you encountered enemies you weren't prepared for. Observation, observation, observation. More than likely you just ran up into them because you couldn't see them. Perhaps you could have spent a few minutes taking a less direct route to the end zone, with more opportunities for observing the path ahead. Maybe 30 seconds of scouting from the high ground would have alerted you to that squad in that building ahead. If you've moved out of early game early enough, you probably have enough time for actions like scouting, which can make all the difference in the transition to the end zone. Another common reason why you're not passing the mid-game is because you're picking bad fights or you're not disengaging when you need to. Sometimes you do get the drop on other squads even without intending to. Sometimes they get the drop on you. Either way, you need to make decisive calls on the value of the engagement. Is it even necessary? Easy squad wipes can net you a good loot boost, but bad engages can end your game. Either way, you're making noise and summoning that dreaded third-party engage. Do you even have to fight? Do you really need that extra loot? Can you not just fall back, change path and direction? Let's say you have the high ground and the element of surprise on an unsuspecting squad. If you defeat that squad, to loot them, you give up the high ground and the element of surprise as you make noise and abandon your advantageous position of observation. So, ask yourself the following. Holy shit, bro, do you even disengage? Anecdotally, I can directly attribute many wins to disengage callouts. Disengage, get endgame position is one of the most important callouts to your team because it is literally the gateway to the endgame. Develop that precognition. Develop that instinct of preservation and the wisdom to identify unnecessary engagements, and you will find success throughout early and mid-game. The final common mid-game failure condition is when you get distracted by loot that you simply don't need. Squads catch up to you from behind because you're taking too much time getting loot that you don't need. This could well be because you screwed up in the early game somehow, or maybe you're winning engagements but you're getting third-partied while you're looting them. You need to be able to turn loot mode off. After the early game phase, you should be balancing the risk whenever you consider stopping to loot a point of interest or eliminated players. Being first into the end zone is, in my view, worth way more than an armor upgrade and half a pack's worth of loot. So ask yourself whether you really need it. Is it worth giving up early mover advantage? Ask these questions before making any looting decision. So while we're talking about mid-game, let's quickly talk about shops. Should you go out your way to use them? Shorthand is yes, but only if it's safe. Scout the shop. It's a natural hot zone for enemy activity. Maybe you shouldn't shop. Maybe you should camp it and see who rocks up. And of course we need to talk about insurance. If you're buying insurance, you're obviously planning on having some sort of bad engagement. Why not get weapon upgrades and increase your odds of surviving engages? My personal priority is to fully upgrade before insurance. You should plan on surviving and not dying, in my opinion. Skip the insurance. If you have the spare cash, if it's safe, and if it won't delay you to the end zone, maybe consider it. But don't stretch yourself out for it. Worth remembering that insurance becomes invalid after round 4 anyway, and if you execute this strategy well, you'll rarely risk dying before round 4. Having it acts like a crutch, it makes you weaker, instills a false sense of confidence. Treat it like an optional backstop. Desirable, but not necessary. So, what about the gun shop? Sure, upgrading weapons is important to give you the edge in endgame, but again, don't take unnecessary risks. You can find all weapon upgrades and ammo in the field. The most useful part of the gun shop is that it sells grenades, and if you have a backpack upgrade with spare slots and the grenadier perk, filling 3 spare slots will allow you to carry a total of 15 grenades. 15 fucking grenades, bro. Having 15 grenades going into endgame is a massive edge if you have trained the skill to use grenades effectively. Laser sights, grips, muzzle attachments, and 15 fucking grenades are all worth hitting the red shop for, but still, balance the risk. Gun shops are a hotspot. So what about airdrops? Again, don't stretch yourself out for one. The gun might be that unreliable pump-action shotgun. If it's on the way, take a look. It could be the versatile Secker with a fast TTK. Of course, all airdrops will have armor plates. If you need them, go for them, but don't sacrifice early mover advantage. The difference between an AK Alpha and a Secker is less than the difference between having the endgame position and not having it. Don't sacrifice progress to endgame to gamble on airdrops. Standard weapons are enough to carry you if you have that final ring positional advantage, whereas a Secker won't help much if you fail to reach the endgame position before other squads. Another common failure condition of mid-game is that you're simply not moving quick enough and you're getting smashed from behind. Nobody likes back shots. So it's obviously harder to look backwards. Everyone is travelling in the same direction towards the end zone, which is normally on the periphery of the initial ring. Realising this, providing that you can navigate your path quickly, you can mitigate back shots by staying ahead of the player or squads behind you. And if you're quick enough, it's you who will find the opportunities to give the back shots en route to the end zone. Travelling quickly cannot be understated. Move through the mid-game like you have a distinct purpose. So let's talk about the end game. It's the most challenging phase of the game to master because you've got to pass through the previous 2 phases to even start practicing endgame. Endgame is all about identifying, taking and holding the positional advantage and finessing the final engage. You might think I'm going to advise you to start getting eliminations in this phase, and if so, you're a fool. Remember that it's possible to win games with 0 eliminations. Nonetheless, eliminations are going to happen as the remaining players get crushed together. All that being said, we like all eliminations except our own. Each one takes us closer to the finish. We just don't have to take responsibility for making them ourselves. Take that advantage position, hunker down and enjoy the carnage. Be the spectator. Be ready to make eliminations, but do not seek them out. Let your enemies break cover, expose themselves to other squads, and come to you. The sound of your enemies destroying each other in the prolonged, drawn-out battles should be music to your ears. You should feel like every other player works for you. Like every gun not pointed at you is your gun. Every shot not fired at you is your shot. You should feel a great sense of satisfaction watching the kill feed scroll and the player count diminish without even participating. As a non-participant, you will retain all of your ammo, all of your armor, and all of your health items, while everybody else diminishes theirs. Remember earlier when I was banging on about necessary engagements? Hold to that principle even in the end game. So to win endgame, you're going to need to identify a advantageous final position in the ring. So be on your map on the regular and always at round end to get the most updated end zone position at the earliest available opportunity. Be the first player in the server to know exactly where the best endgame position is. When you know, take the high ground positions. Use lifter drones to reach otherwise inaccessible rooftops. You'll know if you picked a good position because other knowledgeable squads will fight you for them early in the end game because they know they need them to. You have a good end game position if A. It has concealment and omnidirectional cover. This helps you preserve the initiative, an element of surprise, and helps you mitigate damage in the final engagement. Your position is good if B. It is higher than the surrounding terrain. Height allows for observation, and the height also gives you an engagement advantage. Your endgame position is good also if C. It is completely inaccessible by foot. This allows complete engagement control where you can drop down to engage them and they can't get up to engage you. Your endgame position is good if D. Your position has a roof which protects against airstrike damage. Your endgame position is good if E. You've got space to dodge, which is also good against airstrikes and grenades. You've got a good position if F. You have bottlenecks on approach to your position, which allows you to filter enemies into predictable fields of fire. It's a good position if G. It's surrounded completely by open terrain, forcing your enemies to break cover to advance on your position, giving you engagement control. And it's a good position if it requires climbing or ladders to reach your position because those prevent enemies from handling their weapons correctly on approach. Some of the best endgame positions in this game are right as follows. Number 1, the biggest central building in Relic Ruins. You can take a drone up to the top of the roof of Relic Ruins prime building, then you're almost always going to win the game. Another one is the church in Coots Graveyard for almost exactly the same reasons. The building rooftop with the orange cylinders or the warehouse rooftop in Industrial is an awesome place to get the win. If you find yourself in Nighttown, one of the 3 casino rooftops constitutes awesome endgame positions. The control tower in Airport, either in the control tower or on top of the roof of it, is an absolutely fantastic endgame position. The walls and rooftops of Jail. Many of the medium buildings, preferably the ones without zip access in Newtown. The lighthouse in Seahorn Town. The wind turbines in the rural zone. The mountaintop of Lost Resort. And either on the hilltop or the containers of Outlaw's Den. Now, sometimes the end zone is not going to close perfectly on those individual buildings or positions, but you can often identify these locations as intermediate positions before the final end zone is revealed, and having one of these positions with height advantage enables you to parachute fast travel to the exact end zone position as that information becomes available. Now, what you're going to find is that when these positions are held by your squad, attacking squads attempting to take your position will quite often encounter and engage other squads before they encounter you. Sometimes you can depend in a position entirely through non-engagement by letting other squads do the hard work for you. Attempting to go from strong position to strong position as you dial into the end zone is what you really want to try and do. So what happens if you encounter another sweaty squad who's already taken at the prime position? Well, there's a lot of tactics for taking positions. One is obviously to use detect grenades and specials on approach. If you're going to use either of these, especially airstrikes or other specials, use them to get that endgame position. Rad grenades are also good. Remember that any grenade that you throw that's harmful to the enemy is not going to be harmful to your squad. So you can send 2 teammates into a building covered by a rad grenade or a barrage of grenades or an airstrike, and your team will be completely safe while the area is saturated with AoE damage. That's one of the best ways to displace enemy squads from positions that you want to occupy. Even the final winning last squad engage is not really considered a necessary engagement. On some occasions you can win the match entirely without shooting anyone, but if a squad has got the final endgame position, that really does qualify as a necessary engagement, and you should be going all out to push them off that point before the rest of the squads get there. You want to be 1v1ing, and you don't want any other squads coming up behind you while you are disadvantaged by being outside of that defensible position. So, all things being equal and everything going well, you should have taken the endgame position. So congratulations, you've done most of the hard work. All you really need to do now is hold. If you can hold your shit together, you're most likely going to win the game. If it's an exposed position, deploy all your mobile cover. The presence of mobile cover reveals your position, so watch out for that. But if it has concealment, you can also consider hiding and digging in, waiting for your enemy to break cover, make mistakes without detecting your presence, and taking the advantage that way. It is quite often beneficial not to deploy your mobile cover or decoys or airstrikes until the engagement has started, so as not to reveal your position earlier than you need to. Massive concern for holding the endgame position is to protect against players parachuting in and lifter drone assaults, so watch out for those. Also have consideration for any zipline attack vectors, because ziplines are completely silent, so enemies can just appear from over a ridgeline if you have left any of those avenues of approach uncovered. It's better to have a dedicated view or teammate that specifically covers certain zip lines. Remember to communicate with your team, call out approaches, call out likely approach points, identify your kill boxes, dig the fuck in. Because if players are attempting to displace you from that prime endgame position, you absolutely need to defend it. Its value cannot be overstated. It is how to win games 100%. With a defensive position, you can monitor the player count, you can calculate how many squads are left, and just hold that position. Call out enemy squads crossing open terrain, coordinated, synchronized joint fire on exposed targets of opportunity. Exploit your positional advantage to the highest degree possible. Now, of course, it's highly likely that you're going to have some sort of defensive engagement at this position, and it's likely going to be with a good opponent who also survived everything up to this point too. But if you played it right, they'll be fresh out from the fatigue of the previous fight, distracted, their exact position revealed, low on items, without the positional advantage or the ability to control the engagement. Beyond defense of the prime position, you can monitor the player's alive count on the map, calculate how many squads remain, and just remember to hold. Don't give up your positional advantage you worked so hard for anything. Be prepared to die on that hill. So now we are going to talk about seizing the perfect opportunity and winning that very final engagement. By taking and holding the prime position, you can pretty much wait to identify the perfect opportunity to strike in the final engagement. There will be a perfect opportunity. You can gauge it by listening to the gunfights, identifying positions by audio, monitoring the player's alive count and kill feed, and the time to emerge and engage the final set of enemies is when there are 3 teams left, yours and 2 others. In solos, the player's alive count will read 3, and in teams, the player alive count will read between 3 and 9, depending on how many of your squad members survive to endgame. The perfect engagement involves waiting until the other 2 teams begin an engagement. When it starts, that is the time to get eyes on the fight. You want to observe it. You want to make an estimation on which party is going to survive. And advanced practitioners of this strategy will help engineer the outcome of this pre-fight by putting chip damage and pressure on the stronger of these 2 teams and help the underdog team. The objective here is to influence that final pre-fight so that the surviving team will be as weak as possible for when you engage them. You should be last to engage to guarantee that both teams have split focus and diminished health and armor. Use the fight to get the best angle to finish the survivor. Even chip damage can be enough to dislodge a strong team that's focused elsewhere from an advantaged position. Make your early game pay out. Smash out all of your mecha deployables, all of your specials, and rinse out every grenade in your inventory. Throw absolutely everything at them, overwhelm them, create the most unfair conditions for them, and utterly destroy them without mercy or pity. Take your win decisively. Deliver them the L decisively. So, congratulations, you won. If you executed this strategy well, you might win with a single elimination. The fewer eliminations you have, the better you executed this game-winning strategy. Extra eliminations should not be considered as a bonus, but as an imperfection on execution. The moment you start thinking that more executions is preferable, is the moment you lose focus and start losing games. And that is everything I've got for you in this guide. Thank you very much for watching all the way through to this point. The games that you've seen in the background are going to be fully narrated in terms of my strategic thought process, start to finish, in coming videos. So make sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more content from me, including the thought process on how to win games as they occur in real time. I hope to see you watching me close out multiple Contractors Showdown Battle Royale games in videos on my channel real soon. This is me, RageMaster, signing out.
Perfect. Perfect.